This is the chilling story of America's most prolific serial killer, whose reign of terror spanned decades and whose death left questions about the darkness he carried to his grave. Discovery of the murders. In the summer of 1982, Washington state became the hunting ground of a ruthless predator. The lifeless body of a young woman was discovered floating in the Green River, her life snuffed out by a brutal killer. Within weeks, 4 more bodies were uncovered, all bearing similar marks of strangulation and brutal disposal. The victims were young women, many of them sex workers or runaways. Vulnerable and isolated, they became easy prey for a killer who knew how to gain their trust. As the body count rose, fear spread through the community. Women were warned to stay vigilant, but the Green River killer operated with chilling efficiency, always staying one step ahead. The monster behind the mask. Garry Ridgway seemed like an ordinary man. Born on February 18th, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ridgway was the second of 3 sons. His childhood was far from idyllic. His home life was dominated by a controlling mother and a passive father. Ridgway later revealed that his mother's inappropriate behavior combined with her dominance left lasting scars. Despite his troubled upbringing, Ridgway graduated high school and enlisted in the Navy. After returning from service, he settled into a quiet life in the Seattle area, working as a truck painter. He married 3 times and had a son, giving the appearance of a man who was dependable, if unremarkable. But beneath the surface, Ridgway harbored dark fantasies. He would cruise along highways, seeking out women he deemed vulnerable. Once he gained their trust, he would strangle them with his bare hands, often in the woods or his truck. Then he would discard their bodies in remote locations, sometimes returning to perform necrophilic acts on the corpses. Law enforcement quickly realized they were dealing with a serial killer, but the investigation was fraught with challenges. In the early 1980s, forensic technology was limited, and the killer was meticulous about leaving behind little evidence. By 1984, a special task force had been formed to track down the Green River killer. Hundreds of suspects were interviewed, including Gary Ridgway, who was questioned multiple times. Ridgway even passed a polygraph test, leading investigators to dismiss him as a suspect. In a desperate bid to understand the killer's mind, detectives turned to Ted Bundy, one of America's most infamous serial killers. Bundy offered chilling advice: stake out the bodies. The killer will return to relive his crimes. While Bundy's insights provided some understanding, the Green River killer remained elusive. It wasn't until the early 2000s that DNA technology advanced enough to re-examine evidence from the case. Semen samples collected from 3 of the victims were tested and matched to Gary Ridgway. After nearly 2 decades, the Green River killer had finally been unmasked. Ridgway was arrested in 2001, and the news sent shockwaves across the nation. How had this seemingly ordinary man evaded capture for so long? The answer lay in his unassuming demeanor and his methodical approach to murder. During his interrogation, Ridgway confessed to killing at least 71 women, though he claimed he had lost count. He described his methods in detail, explaining how he would pick up his victims, strangle them, and dispose of their bodies. Deborah Bonner, a 23-year-old woman from Seattle, was trapped in a cycle of poverty and addiction. To make ends meet, she turned to sex work and operated along Pacific Highway South, an area where Ridgway preyed on vulnerable women. Her difficult circumstances left her exposed to the dangers of predators like Ridgway, who targeted those least likely to be missed. In July 1982, Deborah encountered Gary Ridgway, who offered her a ride under the pretense of soliciting sex. Once she got into his vehicle, he drove her to a remote area near the Green River. There, he used his signature method of strangulation to kill her. Ridgway derived a sense of power and control from the act, solidifying his chilling routine. Deborah's body was discovered in the Green River on August 12, 1982, weeks after her murder. At the time, police were unaware they were dealing with a serial killer, but her tragic death became one of the earliest pieces in a disturbing puzzle. Marsha Chapman, a 31-year-old mother of 3, faced unrelenting financial and personal hardships. To provide for her family, she turned to sex work, often frequenting the same areas as other women targeted by Ridgway. Despite her efforts to support her children, Marsha's life was cut short when she crossed paths with Ridgway. On August 15, 1982, Ridgway approached Marsha and offered her a ride with the promise of money for sex. After luring her into his vehicle, he drove her to a secluded location near the Green River. Following his established pattern, he strangled her to death, leaving her lifeless body behind. Marsha's body was found near the Green River not long after Deborah Bonner's remains were discovered. The discovery of multiple victims in the same area raised concerns among investigators, though it took time for them to realize they were dealing with a serial killer. Marsha's death further highlighted the cold and calculated nature of Ridgway's crimes, adding another chapter to his terrifying spree. His confessions were devoid of emotion, a cold recounting of lives taken without remorse. Ridgway admitted to returning to the bodies of his victims to commit acts of necrophilia, a detail that horrified investigators and solidified his place among the most depraved killers in history. His ability to compartmentalize his crimes was chilling. He was a man who could strangle a woman one night and attend church the next morning. Trial and sentencing. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway struck a plea deal with prosecutors. In exchange for his cooperation, he would be spared execution. He was convicted of 49 murders, though investigators believe the true number of his victims may be much higher. During his sentencing in 2003, families of the victims faced Ridgway in court. Their emotions ranged from rage to sorrow. One father famously said, "I forgive you because I have to move on, but you will never escape what you've done." Ridgway, however, remained expressionless, offering only brief apologies that felt hollow. Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He spent his days in isolation, reflecting on his crimes, or so some believed. In interviews conducted years later, Ridgway showed little remorse, often blaming his actions on a need to rid the world of prostitutes. His case became a focal point for criminal profilers and forensic experts, offering insights into the mind of a serial killer. His death brought mixed reactions. For some, it marked the end of a dark chapter in American history. For others, it was a reminder that justice, while served, could never truly heal the wounds he inflicted. Though Ridgway is gone, his crimes continue to haunt the families of his victims and the communities he terrorized. His death leaves unanswered questions. What drove him to such depths of depravity? And how many lives did he truly take?